I'm grateful to Jess and Mariana who are helping us out here as we go through this digital workshop, and really glad that you have joined us for this evening. My name is Lori Ruge-Jones, and I am a biblical storyteller. I've been doing this for a couple decades, mostly because it's such a fantastic spiritual practice. It helps me enter into the story of what God is doing in the world in a different way, in a way that really that fits my personality and my sense of loving stories and being able to be part of those stories as a teller. So I'm going to teach you a story tonight, and I hope that you will find the same kind of engagement and find that it is interesting to you, and it's also a lot of fun. So we're going to be learning a story this evening, and I'm going to be teaching you the method, well, there's a combination of methods from the Network of Biblical Storytellers International. This event tonight is to kind of wet your whistle for the festival gathering, which will be happening online August 6th and 7th this year. The same way that we're doing this, there are several workshops, keynote presentations, and worship services available throughout those 2 days. So I hope that you will also join us for that festival gathering, August 6th and 7th. So, well, first of all, let me say that I've called this workshop Manna for this wilderness. Because in that story, when God gives manna to the people while they're in the wilderness, they don't know exactly what they're getting, but God knows what they need and gives them what they need. And I find biblical stories like that. We don't always know exactly what we're getting with the Bible story. We don't always know exactly what it is we need, but God provides what we need. So we're not learning the story about the manna in the wilderness, but we are learning how to embrace these biblical stories, which are what we need. Could I have the next slide, please? Our objectives for this workshop are to begin to learn a Bible story. We might not get all the way through that Bible story, but you will learn enough of the method to be able to finish that story on your own as we start to learn a story. So, I just want to tell you a little bit about the method that we're going to use. And a lot of this is going to depend on you, because I can't see you out there in the audience. You're not sitting in a row of chairs around me. And so what you learn tonight is going to be up to you to have to follow along and participate. Nobody else is watching you, so don't be self-conscious about that, and we're all learning this together. In the Network of Biblical Storytellers International, we talk about learning a story by heart, partly because a lot of people are afraid of that M word, memorizing, so we talk about learning it by heart rather than memorizing it, but also because we keep things that are precious to us in our hearts. And so we learn these stories by heart. We don't just keep them up here in storage. We learn them by heart. And we will be using our whole body. When you memorize something, we tend to think you're just putting it in your brain. We're going to use our whole body to learn these stories. Our gestures, our thoughts, our feelings, our own emotional connections with the stories. And so that's why we talk about learning these stories by heart. That's how we're going to do that. And it's not only the words, but it's the feelings in the story and the movement that happens in the story and how the characters interact with each other. Understanding all of that is part of learning a story by heart so that we can then perform that story later. I like to think that biblical storytelling allows us to use our whole body, mind, and strength, right? That we are called to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And we use all of that when we learn biblical stories. We're going to be trying out a variety of techniques, which hopefully will help you learn the story. One of the secrets, I think, for performing biblical stories is knowing how you learn. Do you learn well auditorily with your ears? Do you learn with your eyes? Do you learn kinesthetically with using your whole body to move around? Probably a combination of those things. And so we're going to try out a few different methods for learning a story so that perhaps you'll latch onto one that you say, wow, this part really works for me. And that's just kind of a matter of experimenting, figuring out how you learn so that you know how best to learn a biblical story. We're going to start our time together with a prayer, which is on the next slide. I invite you to pray together with me. Open my heart to receive your word. May your story find home in my heart. Open my heart to receive your word. May your story find home in my heart. Amen. So we're going to start with a song, which is on the next slide. This is a song that perhaps you know. And I first want you to read the words on this slide silently. Go ahead and read that. Now we're going to read the song words out loud. So on the next slide, you see I've laid it out a little bit differently. And we're going to read that. I invite you to read along with me. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because I know it's true. It satisfies my longing as nothing else can do. Perhaps you noticed a difference between reading silently and reading aloud, and the way that I had it laid out on the page. These are song lyrics, and we don't get song lyrics usually just in a paragraph where a sentence might go for part of a line and then start again on the next line. This is more like poetry, so how the words might have been laid out, and it helps us know where the breaks are. So even though we don't talk with breaks in the middle of our sentences, I love to tell the story of unseen things above. We don't talk that way, but you probably were able to read it that way. And when we speak in unison, we often put things on the page this way to make that easier for unison speaking. However, this isn't the song as we know it, even yet. So let's go to the next slide. And I know the words are really small there, but I bet you don't even need them. We're going to sing the first verse of this song together. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. That's the song, right? The song isn't just the words, whether they're laid out one way or another, but the song is also the music. And singing music requires something different of your body than just speaking, the way that we have to breathe, the way that we shape phrases and have volume, the way that we make our voice go up and down with the pitches. That's a song, when all of those things come together. That's how the composer intended for it to sound and to be recited according to the music. And it feels like the right way to do it, right? The same is true of stories. We tend to just flatten these stories out on a page because we have often been taught to read the Bible with our eyes. The words that we know get comprehended and go into our brain, and we often read silently. Sometimes, like in a worship service, we have a loud reading, and that's a little different experience when you're listening to someone else read the words instead of you reading them with your eyes. Biblical storytelling incorporates all of these things together so that we're using our voices, our eyes, the images in our brains, our whole body to use gestures, and the way that we shape the phrases according to the way those who compose the biblical stories have shaped the phrases. So all of these things are a part of biblical storytelling. It's about sounds and movement and the experience and the relationship that you have with the story and that you as a teller have with the people who are receiving this. All of these things come together to create a biblical story. So we're going to do a little exercise right now. I mean, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So Jess, you can stop sharing the slides just for a little while, please, so that you can see me a little bit better. First of all, I'm going to read the story to you, and then I'm going to tell the story to you. And I invite you to put in the chat things that you're noticing, either by comparing the two or just even as I read, if you want to notice something, as I tell, if you want to notice something. But just let me know. That's how I can get some feedback from you. Let me know, what are you noticing in these two ways of getting the story delivered. So I'm going to stand up for this. Hold on, get my camera in place here. This is a story from the Gospel of Mark, the 7th chapter. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Now I'm going to tell you the same story. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house there and didn't want anyone to know that he was there. But he couldn't escape notice. A woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him. And she came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged Jesus, "Cast the demon out of her daughter." Jesus said to her, "Let the children be fed first. It isn't fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And she answered him, Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Jesus said, for saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. So the woman went home, and she found the child lying in bed. And the demon gone. So go ahead and put in the chat some things that you noticed between those two stories, those two versions of the story. We have a question about if you need to learn the story by heart to be able to tell it. One of the commitments of the Network of Biblical Storytellers International is that we strive for 95% content accuracy and 75% verbal accuracy, so that 75% of the words will be the same as whatever translation of the Bible you're learning, and 95% of the content. For example, if I said that Jesus was baptized in the River Jordan, and in the Bible it says Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River, that's not such a big deal. You still are understanding what's happening there. However, if I said Jesus was baptized in the Sea of Galilee, that's not accurate. That's not what the Bible tells us where Jesus was baptized. So I'm trying to get the content to be 95% accurate, partly because there's enough pushback about what the Bible does or doesn't say, and what people think the Bible does or doesn't say, and what it means, so that if we're getting the words right, then we can have a conversation about what the Bible says, and also just not to be misrepresenting what's in the Bible. There is a very rich tradition in Jewish tradition called Midrash, which is taking an element of sacred story and creating another story around that might be considered extra biblical material or part of a tradition, but not part of scripture. And that's a rich and really meaningful tradition, but it's not part of what we strive for with this particular method. So I think the answer is yes. You do need to be able to learn it if you want to tell it accurately and represent what's really there. It also would depend on why you're using it. If you're using it in worship service and people have the little bulletin inserts and they might be following along, then it's always good to be telling them the same thing that they're looking at. I usually encourage them to set that down and engage the story instead of the piece of paper. So I also find that learning the story takes some time, and the time that you spend with that story is like personal devotional time. So that's the part of it that's a spiritual practice that, for me, makes it entirely worth the time that it takes to learn it that way. So, anything else that you noticed about the differences between reading and telling? Okay, thanks. I was looking in the wrong chat. Thank you, Mariana. Okay, so yes, when I read that, I tried to give you a really good reading of it, but there's still some limitations when I am relying on a piece of paper and then trying to make eye contact once in a while, and there's just not as much room when I keep it on the paper to add emotions or depth or things like that. Let's see, a better personal connection and more engaging. So thank you. That's part of what we're going for. And it's not, again, just to be entertaining, but a commitment to the way that many parts of the Bible, not all of them, but many parts of the Bible were probably presented this way originally. So a commitment to getting back to that and creating space for people to make a personal connection with the story instead of just having it, go in your ear and maybe out the other one, right? So there is a lot of interpretation that happens in biblical storytelling, and that's one of the challenges and rewards, perhaps, of doing this, is that you have to own the choices that you make. So I did. I'm a mom, and I chose to channel the mama bear part of me if somebody is not taking care of my child the way that I think they should be taking care of them. And so I did have that kind of, listen, buddy, this is my kid we're talking about attitude. That's a choice that I made, and I need to be able to own that. And anybody who might challenge me on that, I would need to be able to describe, why did I choose that? Do I think anybody would ever talk that way to Jesus? Do I think Jesus would ever actually refuse somebody what they were asking for? Lots of complicated things come up here. But even if you don't make those choices intentionally, you'll make them somehow, even if it's subconsciously. So it's good to think about the choices that you're making and why you're making those. And there was a little bit more, it takes a little bit more time to do the telling because of the pauses, and sometimes because of the pace of the reading varies throughout it, of the telling, but it's not as much as even twice as long, right? So it adds a little bit, but it doesn't add very much. So don't worry about that part, I would say. More variety in the voice. Yep. And it's not only my voice, but like I tried to, get right in your face when she was getting in Jesus's face, and Jesus kind of backed up from her. So it's not only the voice quality, but it's the way I can use space, lateral space and vertical space, and just even my posture. You can kind of tell, if somebody's doing this, that sends a certain message. So that's why I say using all of your body, including your voice. That's a really important part of it, but it's not, when you're reading, your voice is almost the only part of you that you get to be expressive with. And when you're telling, you get to use all of what you have. So great. Thank you for that. If you want to keep putting stuff in the chat, you're welcome to, but we're going to keep moving on a little bit here. Because we are here in a story learning workshop for you to learn this story. And so now it's your turn. The way that we're going to do this is that I am going to read the story slowly. And I want you to start thinking about the story. Think about what do you see? So for those of you who are visual learners, what do you see in the story? What does Jesus look like? What does the woman look like? When she comes in and falls at his feet, what does that look like? When he is telling her, let the children be fed first, what does that look like? Is he looking at her? Is he trying to get rid of her? How do you see this story happening? And also think about the feelings. How does Jesus feel when he just wanted a timeout and suddenly somebody's right there with him? How does he feel about that? How does she feel when she learns he's there and she could actually get an audience with him? How does it feel in that dialogue between the two of them? I made some choices about the tones of their voices. How do you hear that? You might not hear that the same way that I do. So think about all of these pieces that are going to make up this story as I read it slowly. And you're going to start to learn the story that way. So if it's helpful for you, to turn around and not look at me, you can. I'm going to sit right here and read the story, so you don't have to look at me. It's not going to be that exciting. If it's better for you to turn around and or close your eyes and think about what's going on in the story, you're welcome to do that. So here is the story. I'm going to read it twice, so we'll do it twice. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him. And she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Okay, that's the first time through the story. We're going to do that one more time. If it's helpful for you to repeat the words after me, aloud or silently, except you're going to do this aloud. So I find it more helpful to say it aloud because then your mouth is learning the shape of the words and not just your brain. So I encourage you to do it out loud if you're going to do that. If it's helpful for you to take some notes or to draw some pictures of the episodes, maybe what's going on here, or even just to tick off on your fingers, you know, first we have this, and then we have this, and then we have this. We'll be looking at that next, so you can kind of see how the story is laid out. But I'm going to read it through one more time, slowly, and you start to take advantage of the way that you learn. So if you think the words are helpful to you, you can repeat them after me. You can draw a picture. You can take some notes. You can pace around your room. Whatever you think is useful for you, just try something out. See what might work. So here's a second time reading through the story. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him. And she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first." For it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Okay, we're going to put the slides back up, please, Jess. There is a handout for you, and the link for it is in the chat there, if you didn't get it ahead of time. And we're also going to see the same thing that I have sent you. So the handout that I have given you, I know this is the least helpful thing ever in technology, but we're only learning this much of this. There's more that I sent you because for those of you who are in a tradition that uses the Revised Common Lectionary, this story shows up on September 5th, I think it is. And so you could continue to learn this and maybe perform it at your worship service on that day. Or find another time to perform it. Anyway, I gave you the whole script, but we're only learning this first half of it. So there on the slide, you can see, and on your handout also, you can see, this is the story. Now, in a traditional Bible, you know, Bibles usually are printed in newspaper columns, which makes it really easy for you to read a short distance across the page with your eyes. But for the purpose of learning a story, these are some things that I have found helpful that I'm just sharing with you. If I looked at this story in a Bible, it would not help me to be able to tell it, having learned it already, because I'm a visual learner, and this is what I see in my brain when I start to tell the story. I see it laid out this way. So there are some things that are helpful, and a long time ago, when the ancient people first started recording these stories, they helped us out to be able to learn them, because of the way that sounds work in an oral culture and repetition works in an oral culture. It is really helpful now for us to be, we're learning it by reading it in a literate culture, but we're going to convey it in an oral way. So there are some tricks that make this more helpful, I think. So I have put in color on this slide some things that are noticeable. One of the themes and the repetition that we see here is the word daughter. So I have that in red on the slide. It shows up 3 times in here. And it is the relation between the mother, the woman, and the person who needs to be healed. She's the daughter. So you know that when they're talking about the relationship between these two, the word there is daughter. So that's a little bit less you have to remember, because you just know that's going to be true. The word children and child also comes up quite a bit. There are 4 instances of that word, and that comes first out of Jesus's mouth, that let the children be fed first, referring probably in this story to the people who are Jewish, right? The children of Israel. Jesus is there for those people first, right? At least in his mind in this story. So the woman then takes that word and kind of turns it on him in her speech. And she talks about even the dogs get to eat the children's crumbs, right? And I find it very interesting that by the time she gets home, her daughter is a child instead of a daughter in that last sentence. And to me, that says something about belonging, that now this child belongs with these other children that Jesus was talking about before. So I don't know how intentional that is by the Gospel of Mark, but I find that really an interesting switch there. The other word that happens 4 times in here is demon, except the first time it's an unclean spirit. And then the next 3 times we see that when they are talking about her condition, it's a demon. The narrator tells us it's an unclean spirit, and then it becomes a demon. So I'm not sure what the difference there is, but that is just a reminder to me. I mean, I underlined that so I remember. First time it's unclean spirit, after that it's demon. So I don't have to worry about which word is coming where. I just know that part, right? And then there's also a similarity, not in vocabulary, but in image, between bowing down at Jesus's feet and the under the table image, right? So she's lowering herself, maybe out of respect, right? I mean, she's physically putting her body on the ground to ask this of Jesus. And then when he would try to put her under in this submissive place, she, again, that's part of what she turns, okay, so I might be under here under the table, but I still get to eat the crumbs. So when I visualize what the story looks like, those are 2 places that I see something similar happening. Her bowing down at his feet, and her reference then to who's under the table. When I prepare a story, I look for these are called verbal threads. I look for what is similar that's kind of consistent and carrying throughout the story that's going to help me remember what the words are, in what the specific words are. They're images that are suggested. Maybe it's a whole phrase. It might not just be one word, but like under the table and bowed down at his feet. There might be some whole phrases that might be part of the style of the book, but they are helpful to be able to remember what's going on through the story. Okay. Thanks for your comment, Wendy. There are lots of ways we can play with the images in this story, and it's a pretty short story. This is only 7 verses, but there's a lot going on here, and a lot of different things that you could change about the dynamics in your voice, in his voice, in her voice, the power dynamics between the two of them. That's what Wendy's suggesting there. There's a lot going on, and choices then that you have to make in regards to that. So when we're looking at this text, it's also helpful for me. I always start a new sentence on the left margin. You can see there. It's not always where a verse starts, but a sentence. Because when I'm telling a story, the verses don't really matter so much to me, but sentences do, because they're units of thought. And when they're too long, then you can see that I've indented there. And I make my scripts out like this every time, so that I can kind of see how things are laying out on the page. A difference in lengths of sentence says something about the pace. If you have a bunch of short sentences, one right after the other, it's going to go pretty quick to get through there. And if you have a long sentence, that slows us down a little bit. So that's another way to help us feel the story and feel how much space and time the story is taking up. So are there other things that you notice about this script? Oh, something that's not showing up there. Sorry about that. I didn't make this very clear on that handout, on the slide. But another thing that is really helpful, I'm just going to talk you through this unless you happen to have printed this out and you could see it a little better, are to think of the story in episodes. So there's all these words, and there are fewer sentences, and there are fewer episodes that are happening as well. So I have divided the story into 3 episodes, and I can remember 3 things, right? So if you delineate these episodes and remember those things, those 3 things. So the first episode is, from there, Jesus set out, went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and didn't want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. That's one episode. That's setting the stage for where this is happening. And it just kind of serves as an introduction. The next episode introduces us to the woman. A woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. That's the second episode. So first, we are learning where this is taking place. Second, we're learning about the woman. And third, we're learning about the interaction between Jesus and the woman. It's a longer episode. So she asks him to cast the demon out. He has a response. She has a response. He has a response. And then she goes home and finds the child. So in the first episode, we set the stage for where this is happening. In the second episode, we meet the woman. And we know she has a little daughter with an unclean spirit. She comes and she's bowing down at his feet, and she's a Gentile. And then in the third episode, we have the interchange. She wants the demon gone. Jesus says, let the children be fed first. I can't take things away from the children. She says, yeah, but there's at least the crumbs, right? And he says, okay, the demon has left your daughter. She goes home and finds the daughter. So it's helpful to see this in episodes so that you're not thinking, oh my gosh, look at all these different words I have to remember. But visualize in your mind what's happening in the first place, what's happening in the second place, what's happening in the last place, beginning, middle, end, right? That's just another way to help us remember the words in the story and the action of the story. Remember when we did the I Love to Tell the Story, part of what makes songs memorable and beloved perhaps is cadence and rhythm. Sometimes rhyme. In many songs, there's a rhyme. We don't always have a rhyme in English. Sometimes there are in the original biblical languages. But there is a cadence and rhythm sometimes, and identifying where these words are and how they fit in the sentence sometimes helps us to find that cadence and that rhythm, which helps us to know the story. So I told a story on Sunday at worship, and it was the story from Mark 5 of the woman with the flow of blood and Jairus' daughter. Those two stories are interwoven with each other. And when everyone thinks the little girl has died, Jesus goes to their house. He enters in and he says, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead. She's only asleep." And that sentence does have a rhyme, but it has some cadence and a rhythm. It's like Jesus is rapping right there. And that just helps me. Once I start that phrase, I know how the rest of it goes because I've learned the whole thing as a unit. So sometimes you can find the rhythm and the cadence in these sentences that will also be helpful in how you're going to remember this story as well. Feel free to keep putting questions in the chat if you have them. I'm trying to keep my eye on that, and I'll answer things along the way. Okay, so I want you to keep looking at this slide and just take a couple minutes to go through this by yourself. I'm just going to give you a couple minutes of silence to learn this story. Maybe you're going to say it out loud. Maybe that's helpful. Maybe you want to start visualizing what's there. Maybe you're hearing some sounds or some rhythms. So go ahead. I'm going to give you this about 3 minutes to do that on your own. Okay, I invite you back to this conversation. I hope that you're feeling a little more confident about the story with the words and the action and the feelings and the movement and the sound, all these things that go together to make a story. I'm just going to set out a little preliminary invitation here that at the end of this session, I'm going to invite 3 people to come on stage with me here. I mean, 3 of you to put your camera on so that we all can see you to tell the story. So as you're practicing throughout the workshop, I would like someone to take episode 1, which is verse 24, and then somebody else take episode 2, verse 25 and 26, and episode 3, 27 to 30. So start thinking about how those words and pieces are coming together in your whole self, and if you might be willing to show us how this works. So we're going to go ahead and look at the next slide, please. In order to think about all these things that are going on in the story, it's helpful to analyze the story and think about what are you going to emphasize and how are we going to convey what's important in the story. So I want you to think about these 4 questions for yourself. What is important in this story? Is there a main point? Is there a feeling? Is there a theological assertion being made? What's important in the story? What are the places that you are connecting with this story? Emotionally, from prior experience, your own expectation of how you think interactions with Jesus might go. What are the places that you connect with the story? What questions do you have? Are there some details in the story that you just don't know the answer to the details, or you don't understand them? Sometimes geography or weights and measures, or there might be some cultural things from from Palestine 2,000 years ago that just don't translate really easily to our culture. And so there are maybe questions of clarification, or there might be theological questions. How in the world can this be happening? Would Jesus really interact that way with somebody? But think about these 4 questions and answer them, please, in the chat. What do you think is important? Where are the places you are making connections? And what questions do you have, either about the story or within the story, or about the language, or what's really going on here? So, Michael, one of the challenges that we have in the way that pericopes are made for readings that are assigned on Sundays is that we're not getting the whole story. So I agree with you, and I debated whether or not to include from there, because there's no antecedent for it in the part of the story that we have here. We don't know from where Jesus is. So thank you for looking that up and letting us know where that is. But that's a choice that you can make, and it is perfectly fine to cut off a couple words. Just because the lectionary people decided to keep those words doesn't mean we have to keep them. So without the previous story to tell us where he is, the from there doesn't make a lot of sense. So. And please feel free to answer each other's questions if you want to in the chat. Yeah, so that demon thing, that is something that is really not part of our culture, generally speaking, in North America. Sorry, I do not need to assume that all of you are from North America, but it is not part of my experience anyway of sort of an everyday occurrence or something that I would expect to happen. Although there's lots of demon possession and unclean spirits kinds of things in scripture. So how do we portray that? How do we think about it? How do we explain it? Or does it matter if we explain it at all? Maybe it doesn't. But whatever is going on here, it is not entirely specific. We don't know anyway what is meant by a demon. But it is very distressing to the mother, right? And she wants this fixed. She doesn't want her child to have to suffer. But yeah, how do we talk about demons? Some cultures in the world, I think, would have a closer relationship with that kind of language and that imagery. So it's important to know who your audience is. It's not part of my everyday language or experience to know what that might be. And there are, somebody suggested that this maybe could be an autistic child or a child with a condition that we might have a name for, or a behavior that we might understand how to make adaptations for. But in the story, we don't get any of that diagnosis, right? We just know it's an unclean spirit. So, but I think it's good to think about those sorts, especially if you have a question about something and you're spending time with this story, then probably people who are listening to you are going to have some questions about those sorts of things too. Trudy's asking, why does Jesus refuse her at first? I think that's a theological question, Trudy. And but I think that the clue, the way that I read this story anyway, comes in the detail that she was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin, because there's not really any reason for us to have that detail except that it explains something later. And so I understand this to be that Jesus is saying, first of all, Jesus seems to think that there are limited resources here, and that the children who he has been sent there for are maybe going to use up or need all that he is bringing. And she is saying, I don't need very much. A crumb. You can give them the best portion. I just want a crumb. Which says something about what she believes about Jesus. You know, that even a little bit of Jesus is going to go a long way for this mom. So that's the only thing. I mean, that's how I understand this, that Jesus is in fact learning something here about the expansiveness of God's grace and God's love that he is embodying. So I kind of think that's why, and isn't it an interesting story that got left, that the editors didn't say, oh, this is too complicated, we're going to get rid of this story, but that the Holy Spirit kept this story in scripture, even though it's kind of complicated that way. Somebody noted how far Jesus had to walk, right? It was like 35 miles. Tyre and Sidon are way, on the map, they're way up there, Judea, Samaria, Galilee, and way up there is Tyre and Sidon. We don't know why he went there in this story particularly, but like he really wants to get away from people, and he has traveled a long way. So yes, he's cranky. He's been on the road a long time. He doesn't want to be bothered. He's trying to find a quiet place alone, which he does a lot. Many people are making a case for Jesus being an introvert from all of the times that he was looking for a place apart to be by himself. But I kind of like the humanity of Jesus in this story, that he has some things to learn, and that he, even about God, and he is learning them from unlikely people along the way. Okay, so you're finding a lot of things that are important. So and questions, connection points. Maybe you've had a time in your life that you were desperately praying for someone else to be healed. So that might be a place that you connect with the mother. Maybe you've been sick and other people were praying for you. That might be a time that you connect with the daughter. So it's helpful to make these connection points so that you are thinking about this story, experiencing this story, not just in your brain, but your whole body. I mean, right down to your gut, that you are experiencing what's going on in the story. Because then when you are performing the story, all of that stuff is going to add up together and it will come out as part of your performance. Okay, so Michael has a question about verse 26, which is, now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. So one thing that's helpful in learning a story is to try to say the same line in a lot of different ways and see which one feels like it has the most integrity with the arc of the whole story and with who you know Jesus to be. Although we have to let Jesus out of this box of piety that we tend to keep him in all the time. You know, the baby Jesus, meek and mild, we tend to leave him there all the time. He is a person who has the full range of emotions that people have. But just try that on. So I think I used to tell this with a lot of disgust, like she was a Gentile, Syrophoenician, kind of really overplaying that. But I don't think that's the main point of the story, so I don't want to emphasize that too much. And I also just want to present that as an interesting detail. Like, we don't know how he's going to react given that she's a Gentile. So I was trying to suggest that it would be problematic, but not all the way to disgusting. It could go that way, I think. But my awareness, especially through the network of biblical storytellers, has been raised about the ways that we are racist and anti-Semitic when we tell these stories. So I really try to be careful about how I portray people I don't know. I'm just talking about somebody else as a storyteller, and I want to check my own privilege in that way. So I wanted to suggest that this is a tricky detail, but not to say that we should hate this woman, because actually I think she's one of my heroes. I really like this woman, and I relate to the woman much more than I relate to Jesus in the story. So again, that's something that you kind of try on. Say the line several different ways and see which one makes sense, which one feels really icky. And why does it feel icky? Does it mean you should go with that, or does it mean you should stay away from that? I hope that's helpful there. Okay, great. So we're going to go to the next slide, please, and look at some performance details. So when you are preparing a story for performance, you are going to get into that story in a different way than if you're just sitting down and reading it silently, or even if you're reading it aloud, because even when you're reading aloud, you're kind of confined to, you know, the podium and the book, and you're standing here, and this is how much space you have to work with. But when you're a teller, you got all the space that you can manage to take up. I'm a pretty small person, and I like to take up a bunch of space because I don't normally take up a bunch of space just by standing there. So we're going to look at these different pieces of the story to, again, give you more things to grab onto as the teller so that the story is becoming part of your whole being as you are telling it. So these are the details. And again, I'm going to ask you to suggest some things in the chat as we go along, how you might answer these questions. But look at the geography of the story. Now, that might be landmarks, geography, like I was kind of describing the map to you. Jesus went up to Tyre and Sidon, or up to Tyre in the story. So it might be that kind of geography, but it might just be in the house, outside of the house. So, or it might be in the same room, but somebody's over here and somebody's over here, and then they get together over here, and then they go this, kind of look at how, like a balcony view, how are things laid out? How are they blocked or mapped out in the story? Again, another visual exercise for you to think where things happen. And you also want things to happen in the same place if they happen more than once. So like in the resurrection story, when Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb, every time she goes to the tomb, it should be in the same spot. And then she runs back to tell Peter and the other disciple. And then when they come to the tomb, it should be in the same spot as it was before, right? So that's part of the geography, is that you're thinking about where are things located in relation to each other. So where is Jesus in the story? When the woman comes in, where does she stand? Where does she sit? Where is she at his feet? So that we can tell, when Jesus is speaking and when she's speaking and when the narrator is speaking. Unlike in acting, you're not going to switch voices, and you don't have to switch positions, because that kind of looks silly if you do it too much. Like, and Jesus said to her, and she said to him, and Jesus said to her. That becomes distracting. But if you kind of know that you're kind of speaking from this way when Jesus is speaking, and then the woman is speaking from this way, that's part of the geography, and it helps the listener keep track then of who's doing what in the story. So figure those kind of things out. What are the emotions in the story? What does Jesus feel like? What's it like to feel tired at the end of a day? You know what that feeling's like. How do you portray that? What does the mom feel like when she is at her wit's end because this daughter is, her life has changed because of the demon? What does that feel like? What does it feel like to beg for something that you need and you don't know if they're going to say yes or no? What does the relief feel like at the end of the story when the demon's gone? What does Jesus feel like when she challenges him and pushes back? So think about those emotions, and then how do you portray them? And remember, you have your whole self to portray them. So it might be with your voice, with pace. You knew when you were in trouble, right? When your mother said, "Lori, Marie, get in here now," right? That was a different message than if she said, "Lori, come in." So use your voice to portray those kinds of emotions. Your eyes are really powerful. I often take off my glasses when I tell so that you can see better. But one time I did this, which I found pretty effective too. So how you use your face and your posture, if you're kind of turning away and then turning back, if you move back from the screen or close to the screen, you can affect those, the emotions. You can help us to feel those emotions. Gestures, many of us talk with our hands. I am one of those, but this doesn't really mean anything unless I make it mean something. So think about what those gestures are going to be and use a few of them really intentionally and carefully. And that really helps your storytelling. The action, we talked about a little bit. What's the movement like in the story? Is it fast or slow? Are there power differentials going on? How do you portray those things? How do you use pause? Some of you commented that I paused more in the telling than I did in the reading. And pause is very, very effective because people know something else is coming, but they don't always know what. So you can really get their attention with those pauses. And then your voice quality and tone. Are you talking high or low, fast or slow, loud or soft? And how is that helping you convey some of the action and some of the emotions in the story? So, okay. So when you look at the story, you might take some notes on your, if you've got the script laid out like that, take some notes and say, pause here. Or if I had a little bit more, it's harder to do on the screen. I mean, when I'm doing digital. But if I had a little bit more room, I might actually, show the woman down here at Jesus. She fell down at his feet. But when I'm telling the story and I only have, this much space on a computer, I have to kind of limit my this much here and kind of say, she fell down at his feet. Where if we were in a room in person, I could actually get down here and be her. So you kind of have to adapt. But that's something that you can do. So yeah, you can make notes right here on your script as you go along. Voice quality. I already said voice quality. Yeah, never mind. Okay, so we're going to give you a little time to rehearse again, just a couple minutes to rehearse. And I'm wondering if I have any volunteers. Anybody would be willing to put in the chat that you are willing to come on stage and tell episode 1 or episode 2 or episode 3. So I need all 3 of those episodes. And so in this couple minute of rehearsal time, I'm going to ask you to rehearse just that episode that you're committing to. And then we will have you up here on stage and we can see how the story is progressing. So everybody out there, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to be rehearsing. You might be looking at the script that you printed. Actually, Jess, could you put that slide back up on the screen for those who weren't able to print it ahead of time so they could see it at least? So think about images, think about movement, think about the words. How are you going to be able to tell the story? If you just want to focus on one of the episodes, that's fine too. And Wendy is focusing on episode 1 and Trudy is focusing on episode 2. And we don't have a volunteer for 3 yet, but I'll do it if I have to. So just take a couple more minutes to be rehearsing that. So it's back to the script. A couple slides back. Yep, that one. Thank you. Just a couple minutes to be rehearsing that however it works for you to be rehearsing.
But a woman whose daughter had an unclean spirit found out he was there. And she went and fell down at his feet and begged him, and bowed down at his feet. Now, the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. That's it. Sorry, I'm so frazzled.
Okay, Jean.
She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "But sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he said to her,
Well,
for saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he said to her,
Jean, your story's on the loop.
for saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. It must be the demon, right?
So he left the region and he went out to Tyre. And he wanted to, oh, now I've forgotten the story. He went out to Tyre.
Well, that was an experiment. Thanks for hanging with us, everybody. So what I would like you to have learned from that is that if you work on a little bit of the story at a time, make sure you get that part down and then work on the next part. And then you'll have blocks that you can put together. And you can see that it doesn't take too terribly long to learn any one episode, especially if you've done some of this homework ahead and done some of the analysis and figured out what you're going to emphasize, how you're going to say things, where things are happening. If you've done that kind of homework at the beginning, and then you start to learn what the words and the movements and the actions are, then learn those in smaller episodes and put those together, and then the story will come together. So our time is up, but if you have questions, I can hang out for a little bit longer. And I do want to remind you that we were going to start to learn a story and learn the methods from the Network of Biblical Storytellers International. I think we have done those two things. And August 6th and 7th is when the festival gathering is. That it will be online, the same platform here, hop in, and you can find more information about that at nbsint.org. You can register for that there. There will be more workshops like this, keynote speakers, worship, storytelling performances. So please join us for that as well. Thanks for joining me here. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will stay on for a few more minutes to answer any questions that you might have. There are a lot of resources on the NBS website as well that are really helpful, like workshops, how to do a workshop, how to learn a story, lots of things there that will be helpful for you. And I am putting that also in the chat. Thanks again for being here. I like teaching.